The haunted taxi ride. In a cozy room, the warm yellow light illuminated the aged face of Mrs. Margaret. Beside her, young Jason, with his wide, eager eyes, sat waiting for the mysterious tales she would tell. Each time, Jason's eyes sparkled, as if the stories of ghosts and the supernatural were the most precious gifts he could receive. "Today, I will tell you about a very special taxi ride," Mrs. Margaret began, her voice soft like a night breeze. "This taxi doesn't just carry people, it also transports forgotten souls." Jason took a deep breath, his heart racing. "What's so special about this taxi, Grandma?" he asked, curiosity etched on his face. "This taxi usually departs at midnight, when darkness envelops everything," Mrs. Margaret explained. "The driver is a middle-aged man with a serious face. Every night he receives calls from a distant address, rumored to be filled with many mysterious stories and restless spirits." Mrs. Margaret took a deep breath, as if to prolong the suspense for the boy. One night, he received a call from a young girl. She had deep-set eyes and an ethereal appearance. When she got into the car, the atmosphere inside grew heavy and cold. "Where did she ask to go?" Jason pressed, his gaze fixed on her. "She wanted to go to a cemetery, a place where many had mysteriously disappeared," Mrs. Margaret said, her tone gradually becoming tense. The driver felt uneasy, but he drove on. The roads became lonelier than ever, darkness swallowing all light. Mrs. Margaret paused, giving Jason a moment to envision the gloomy scene. He sat silently, the atmosphere around them feeling heavier. Throughout the journey, the girl began to speak of lost souls, she continued, and a chilling sensation started to spread throughout the car. Suddenly, whispers erupted from the back seat, as if someone was trying to connect with the driver. "What happened next, Grandma?" Jason asked, unable to contain his excitement. "Wait, you'll find out soon," Mrs. Margaret smiled, the mystery in her eyes making Jason even more anxious. "Everything will be revealed in the next part of this story. Remember, what happens in the dark isn't always frightening, but it isn't safe either." Mrs. Margaret raised her hand as if to point at the darkness outside the window, where untold stories awaited. The taxi continued to roll through the still night, its headlights illuminating the deserted roads. The driver, with a heavy gaze, struggled to stay focused. Although it sounded strange, the whispers from the back seat felt like something lurking inside. The girl remained seated, her eyes glimmering like moonlight, and her voice whispered like a gentle breeze brushing against the driver's ear. "Do you know the stories about this place?" she asked, her voice echoing in the quiet space. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror but saw no one else but her. He felt uneasy, as if he were dreaming. I'm not sure," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "There are many stories about lost souls here." The whispers sounded again, this time clearer, as if many souls were conversing together. The girl tilted her head, a mysterious smile blossoming on her lips. "They say that those who have gone missing in this place never truly leave. They just wait, waiting for someone to remember them." A sudden chill rushed into the car, making the driver shiver. He looked outside, the darkness thickened as if consuming everything. Though anxiety bubbled within, he fought to grip the steering wheel and keep the car moving forward. "Have you ever felt the souls around you?" the girl asked, her eyes lighting up. "Maybe they are sitting next to you right now." The driver felt a cold breeze sweep past him, as if someone had just touched his shoulder. He swallowed hard, fear rising within. "Maybe I'm just tired," he muttered, trying to reassure himself. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror again, the girl had vanished. In an instant, unease and apprehension spread through him. He turned to look behind. The girl was still sitting there, quiet and faint. He calmed himself. Probably just tired from a long day, having driven a distance. The whispers surged once more, now resonating in the air. The sounds were vague, like voices of forgotten souls mingling with the wind. "Save us," a voice murmured softly, sending chills down his spine. Suddenly, a ghostly mist enveloped the car, transforming everything into a mystical scene. Only darkness and cold remained. The driver struggled to regain his composure, yet he felt an invisible force pulling him into the darkness. "Don't worry, it's just the wind," he told himself. But the whispers continued, like an eerie melody shattering the silence. He pressed down on the accelerator, hoping to escape this place quickly. The engine screamed as the taxi sped through the empty streets. The driver, filled with tension, decided to accelerate to escape the strange feeling enveloping him. Tonight was anything but normal, and he didn't want to get involved in anything strange anymore. Suddenly, a figure appeared right in the middle of the road. "Oh my God!" He slammed the brakes, the car swerving as if it were about to lose control. In that moment, his heart seemed to stop when he saw a woman standing there, her pale face and lost eyes staring blankly. "Are you crazy? How can you stand in the middle of the road at this hour?" He leaned out of the window, shouting. His anger temporarily dulled his fear. The woman, with a vague expression, simply shook her head. "Turn back. You're carrying a demon in your car." That statement hit him like a slap to the face. "You're the demon," he yelled, unable to comprehend. Not wanting to hear any more nonsense, he hit the gas and sped away, feeling as though he was fleeing a nightmare. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror, the girl in the car was now covered in blood. A chill ran down his spine, and he slammed the brakes again. No, please." He turned around to look, but the girl remained seated, her face calm as if nothing had happened. "What's wrong?" Her voice was soft, as if everything was perfectly normal. Nothing's wrong?" He stammered. "I'm just really tired, so I mistook the brake." He bit his lip, trying to regain his composure, but the panic inside him wouldn't fade. The car continued rolling, but the horrific thing waiting ahead never disappeared. Dark images flashed in his mind, ghosts gliding through the streets, whispers full of dread. All of it reminded him that tonight was not just an ordinary ride. With each meter that passed, the tension mounted, as if something was lurking, ready to engulf him. "Are you scared?" The girl asked again, her tone gentle but mysterious. "No," he snapped, but inside he felt a whirlwind of confusion. He could sense that everything was slipping out of his control. Despite his efforts to appear calm, he knew a great storm was approaching. Ahead, the dim lights of the houses flickered by like lost souls in the night. This ride was not just a simple trip. It was a journey into darkness, where the ghosts waited to pull him into their cold embrace. The taxi continued to roll steadily, but the atmosphere inside the car grew heavier than ever. The driver felt a cold wind sweep over his shoulder, recalling the lingering feelings of fear. Suddenly, in his line of sight, a man stood by the roadside, waving for a ride. "Is there really someone out here in the middle of nowhere at this hour?" he thought, a strange feeling rising within him. Despite his doubts, he decided to stop the car. The window rolled down, and he leaned out to ask. The man looked straight at him, his face blurry. He whispered into his ear, "You're carrying a demon in your car." His tone was filled with mystery. "You're crazy," he replied, slightly annoyed by what he had just heard. Without waiting for a response, he hit the gas, leaving the man standing there with a panicked look. He glanced in the mirror. The man had vanished. As the car began to move, an unsettling feeling washed over him. He glanced at the rearview mirror, and the image made him want to close his eyes. The girl's head had fallen off, blood gushing from her neck, looking horrific. "No," he screamed, slamming the brakes. the car swerving nearly out of control. Despite his attempts to stay calm, that image kept spinning in his head. He couldn't shake off the fear, no matter how much reason told him it was just a nightmare. Turning to look at the girl, he found her still sitting there, her face tranquil and her expression blank. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle as if nothing was amiss. "Nothing. I'm just really tired," he replied, his voice lost in fear. The last incident had left him shaken, but he still tried to keep calm, reassuring himself that it was all just fatigue. But even as he tried to convince himself, the feeling of unease lingered. "Keep going," he thought, pressing the gas again, ignoring the terrifying images that clung to his mind. All he wanted was to finish the ride and get home. The journey led him down a dim path, surrounded only by dense trees. The space became desolate, silent, save for the rattling engine of the taxi. Looking out the window, the dark silhouettes of the trees loomed like giant hands reaching out, making him feel as though he was surrounded by the mysteries of the night. How much further? He wondered, a strong sense of dread rising within him. This trip was no longer just a journey. It had turned into a battle with the ghosts and nightmares that were slowly revealing themselves in the darkness. As the car slowly rolled forward, he felt as if he was entering an entirely different world. All sensation of driving faded into the background. Thick fog enveloped everything around him, making it seem dreamlike. He struggled to focus, but the pale light and gloomy atmosphere blurred his view ahead. Suddenly, he glanced into the rearview mirror. This time, the image was startlingly clear. The girl's eyes glowed a menacing shade of red, blood streaming from them like tears of pain and resentment. A wave of terror surged within him. "This cannot be real," he yelled, but no one could hear him. In his panic, he failed to process the situation. The car sped forward, and before he could stop, it slammed into a large tree by the roadside. Everything around him fell silent. He lost consciousness, oblivious to everything. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the tree canopy, he woke up in a desolate forest. Pain coursed through his body as he realized he was lying beside the wrecked vehicle. Strangely, despite his injuries, he managed to stand up, struggling to escape the car. Looking around, the scenery overwhelmed him. A strange atmosphere enveloped the place, and whispers echoed from somewhere, yet there was no one there. Only the sound of falling leaves and the wind rustling through the branches remained. He sat helplessly against a tree, feeling powerless and alone, as if he were in the midst of a battle with himself. "Where am I? Why did this happen?" he mumbled, his mind in disarray. Everything felt like an endless nightmare, and the shadow of the girl continued to haunt him. He needed to find a way out of here, but the ghosts and terrifying memories clung to him. After leaving the wrecked car, he began to wander down the deserted road, determined to find a ride home. The sun was high, but the air remained heavy and cold. The memories of last night haunted him, making each step feel burdensome. After walking for a while, he spotted an old house by the roadside. At first, he hesitated, but a fierce thirst drove him to ask for a drink. Knocking on the door, he was greeted by an elderly man, his wrinkled face still full of life. "Hello, come in," the old man smiled, but there was something oddly unsettling about his grin. He stepped inside, silently grateful to find shelter. "Do you have any water?" he asked. "Of course, let me get you some," the old man replied, his eyes seeming to expect a thrilling story. He began recounting his experiences, from the taxi ride to the gruesome images of the girl with the blood-red eyes. The old man listened intently, nodding occasionally, as if he understood everything the young man was sharing. When he finished his tale, the old man sighed, looking as if he were haunted by what he had just heard. Do you know where you had that encounter? The old man asked seriously. There used to be a bus that went off a cliff there. Many people, both young and old, died in that horrific accident. Their souls never left this place. Hearing this, he shuddered in fear. The atmosphere grew heavier than ever, as if the dead were silently watching him from the shadows. Am I the next one? He wondered, dread invading his thoughts. The old man continued to speak, his voice rising and falling. Many have gone missing here. No one dares to pass through at night. You've been fortunate to survive, but don't let what you've seen happen again. Cold sweat trickled down his back. But why me? He asked, his voice trembling. The old man remained silent, his gaze filled with mystery. Hearing this, Jason looked up and asked Mrs. Margaret, "Does the story continue?" Mrs. Margaret nodded, her expression becoming more serious. Yes, it continues, Jason. Those souls never truly fade away. Every night they wait for late-night drivers. At midnight, they reappear, trying to lead lost souls to the site of the accident. A chill ran down Jason's spine at the thought. Many have not survived, Mrs. Margaret continued. It's rumored that to escape that place, they need to capture passing souls to trade for their own. Something has trapped them here. The young man in this story was the only one who survived that horrific night, she added, gazing deeply into Jason's eyes as if to convey the weight of the tale. Jason listened, filled with anticipation and dread. These things were too horrific to believe, yet the sensations he had experienced lingered in his heart. The story goes on, Mrs. Margaret said. When he left that house, he looked back and saw that the house had disappeared. This made him all the more eager to leave. He could hardly believe his eyes. Jason sat there, feeling as though the pieces of a larger puzzle were slowly coming together. Mrs. Margaret's story seemed not just a legend but a warning. "Can I tell anyone else about this?" Jason asked, his voice full of concern. Mrs. Margaret merely smiled sadly. "That's your decision. But remember, some things are better left in the past. Be careful when driving at night." Jason looked out the window, filled with uncertainty. The scenery outside seemed somewhat strange, as if the souls were still watching his every step. He knew this journey was far from over,